You cannot control an outcome, but you can always put yourself in the best position to succeed. So don't worry about the stuff that you can't control. You can throw the best pitch in the world and it can hit for a dinger.
The Move the Chains podcast is here to equip athletes, entrepreneurs, and executives with the mental frameworks to push past your limitations and achieve extraordinary results. We've got a great guest for you today to help you do exactly that. We are talking to Gary Chupik. Gary is an internationally recognized mental performance coach, one of the best in the world. He's got over 30 years of leadership experience at every level, from local to national. He unlocks performance in professional teams, athletes, business professionals, and those wanting to find their next level in performance. Gary's unique methods and processes are unprecedented in the sports and business worlds. So we're going to have to talk to you about what those are, Gary. In addition to the speaking and just this list of who you've worked with, Gary, is super impressive. The Houston Texans, Washington Huskies. You were just telling me before we hit record who you were texting with. I won't name drop for you, but Stanford University, USA Figure Skating, Seattle Mariners, Russell Wilson's company, Limitless Minds. The list goes on and on. I'm going to stop with the intro. Gary, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is going to be a lot of fun. So we were talking before we hit record that mindset is one of those topics, and sports psychology are some of those topics that a lot of people talk about, but very few actually know what they are and what they're doing when they get into those. So can you elaborate a little bit on that for us and just tell us how you got into this and what makes what you do so different and unprecedented?
Yeah. Well, you might be slightly underwhelmed. To me, it's all sort of like logical and rational, but not everyone thinks that way these days, right? But no, I grew up actually in Saskatchewan, Canada, and married a girl from Seattle, Washington. And I was not planning on being a leader, but I think when you live your life with character and integrity, leadership finds you, because I think you become a trustworthy person. So your ability to lead yourself is probably the most important aspect of leadership. And so I just kind of felt like, man, I gotta take care of me first. I don't have time to worry about other people. And I think some people noticed along the way. And so I've always been a little bit of a reluctant leader. I say leadership kind of found me, and I think that's probably pretty true. And it wasn't probably until the last 10 years where I've sort of embraced that leadership aspect of my life and really just sort of like watered it and fertilized it. And here I am today. But I grew up in ministry. I was a pastor, ordained pastor for 28 years. And in 2017, I had a burnout and I didn't know what to do with my life. And I was like, where do I go from here? And it's kind of ironic because I had helped thousands, literally thousands of people, whether it's coaching or counseling or doing, just walking and guiding and walking along with other people and mentoring. Yeah. And then for me, I just couldn't, I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe I was just myopic, but I couldn't really help myself out of this funk that I was in. And I realized that I had burnt out. And for me, burnout is simply self-mismanagement. And I think I was just saying yes to too many things and juggling too many things for such a long time that it took a toll on me. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like my mindset has always been a little bit stronger than my body. And at some point, my body said, okay, you're done. Like you can't keep overriding your body. We say that you can't out diet or out exercise a bad diet. Like I think in the same way to some degree that you can't really out mindset your physiology. And so I had to pay more attention to my body. And so I did that for a season. And then just through various divine appointments is what I would call them, I ended up meeting the right people at the right time. And ended up meeting Russell Wilson's mental performance coach, Trevor Moawad. And Trevor was good enough to invite me into a mentoring relationship with him. And I worked with him for a while. And then I went out on my own in 2019. And I've been doing what I'm doing now since then. So it's just been a wild ride here. I don't know if I would have picked these classrooms, at least that's what I call them, these classrooms that I feel like I've been in. Probably wouldn't have picked them. I probably would have picked different classes, but we're in the classes that we're in to get whatever degree that we're in. And so here I am. I sort of took the side door to this profession. And I think my unique flavor of mental performance is the leadership aspect and how that aspect of leadership overflows into just about every area of life. And whether you're an athlete or you're running a business or you are in your own home and you're a leader, it doesn't matter. It's all the same principles. So not a very glorious way to be where I am, but here I am.
I'd say it's plenty glorious. One of the things you said about the importance of leading yourself first really resonates with me. I mean, that's actually a line that I use a lot when I speak. Lead yourself first. And so as you were talking about the connection of leadership, particularly self-leadership, into performance, can you maybe elaborate on how those are so tethered together?
Yeah, it's a really wise observation because it really strikes at the heart of what mental performance is. And to me, what is at the heart? And you'll have a lot of people will talk about motivation, that you have to have motivation to do whatever it is that you want to do or succeed at a high level. But with some of the people that I work with at the highest levels, motivation is not the core. It is not the holy grail of performance. But what I think the holy grail of performance is your ability to lead yourself, even when you're not motivated. I remember sitting down with a starting defensive tackle in the NFL. And I was like, how motivated do you have to be every day to do your job really well? And he was like, oh man, he goes, it's just not that important. I have a job to do, and that was his entire mindset. And there are other aspects of our conversations that did revolve around motivation, but they're really peripheral to the idea that you have to lead yourself. And so how many laps are you going to swim around somebody if you're if you lead yourself really, really well, even when you're not motivated? Because when you're not motivated, you're not going to do the things necessary and what it takes to be excellent or elite at what you do. So your ability to lead yourself is crucial. And so I created this thing called the leadership pyramid. I was just sort of trying to map it out some way, somehow. And I came up with this idea of the leadership pyramid, where in the bottom of the pyramid, you have your self-leadership. And it's sequential. That's the secret. It's sequential. So when you lead yourself really well, then you can lead somebody else. You can coach, mentor, be an example, anything like that. But you shouldn't do that if you have a meth problem. Like, you shouldn't be involved in somebody else's life, because what you'll do is you're a bad example to them, essentially. So when you lead yourself really well, then you can lead another person. And when you lead another person really well, the third level is group leadership. And if you do group leadership really well, then you can do area or department leadership. And if you do that really well, you can lead an organization. And how many of us know organizations that have stress fractures or crumble because of the self-leadership of its primary leader? And so, as you will know, I don't think that self-leadership piece ever ends, does it?
Dude, you got to get out of my head, because as soon as I actually have a leadership pyramid as well that I've come up with and that I use in my slides when I present. Individual responsibility or self-leadership is on the bottom. So we're 100% aligned there. And then it goes trust and then teamwork. And so very, very similar to the concepts and the hierarchy that you've got there. So I love it. And we're on the same page. It's interesting that, one of my early mentors taught us that it was a business mastermind. And, we thought we were coming in to get strategies or tactics to help our businesses grow, but it essentially turned into self-development and fixing ourselves, because as the leaders of our businesses, we were the limiting factor. The business could not grow beyond our own limitations or limiting beliefs or flaws or whatever the things were, right? And so by identifying and addressing those, we were then able to, expand the capacities, capabilities of what our businesses could do. And I mean, I couldn't be more in agreement with what you're saying. When you look at with your pyramid, and it goes kind of department and then to organization, what do you feel like are some of the biggest differences, or what are the things that people have to add in terms of capabilities to go from department to organizational leadership?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think one of the most important aspects of the pyramid is that it is sequential, because it's really determined by if you've led the previous group. So, for example, we mentioned, if you're a bad example to somebody, don't lead somebody else. Why don't you want, or why don't we want you leading a group when you haven't done, the other two layers, right? Right. Well, if you've never led anybody, when you're a group leader, part of the job of a group leader is to sort of reproduce the group, or, create that bullpen or that next person, or that, coach somebody else to be a group leader. But if you haven't done that, then you're most likely not going to do that very well because you don't know how. And when you get to that department, a department or area is like a group of groups. And so to have the experience of actually leading a group before is really important. And then to go to that final level, I don't know, not everyone's wired that way. Like not everyone is wired to be the leader of an organization. And so I think some of the skill sets different. I think your ability to create vision and communicate vision is really important. I think Nick Saban said it so well. He gave this talk to one of the car dealerships that he owned. And he gave this talk about how he organizes Alabama football. And he said, it's the same thing for your car dealership. And I was like so mesmerized by this, right? And he said, it's really, really simple. He said, communicate the vision. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Everybody's got to know where they're going. Everybody's got a role, right? Okay. Everybody's got a role. Like that makes a lot of sense. Everybody needs to have a scorecard. Like we need to know if we're winning, right? Like, and so we keep track of all these things. And then finally, there's daily execution. And what is daily execution? I mean, it just sounds like him, doesn't it? And I think, it's probably not that different in most organizations. However, I do think to be an organizational leader, you have two choices, really. Number one is to be that visionary leader that leads an organization. And number two is, can you work with a board or, some type of a leadership team where you're envisioning or visioneering together and you become the spokesperson, but it's sort of vision done in group or in team, which I like too. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, in some ways that might even be preferable to be able to come up with a vision as a team because you have that organic buy-in. So I don't know. Those are just a few thoughts. What do you think?
It's interesting. I've always loved sports and specifically football as an analogy for businesses. And a couple of reasons that you touched on there. One is, if you're on a football team, whether it's stated or not, the goal is pretty obvious, right? If you're in the NFL, the goal is to win the Super Bowl. Now, there are some teams that we know don't have a chance to do that this year, but ultimately that's the goal. If you're, especially in the Power Four conferences in college football now, the goal is to get to the playoff and, depending on the school, to win a title. And so even, and I'm sure in most of those organizations, it's communicated very clearly that that's the goal. But in the corporate world and businesses, a lot of times I find that that is missing, right? Just like Nick, he walks into the car dealership and he's like, well, you guys haven't clearly communicated what the overarching vision is, what the mission is. I mean, Arnold talks about that in his book, and so many of the high performers that we would study and look to talk about the importance of having that vision and working towards it. And when you're building teams, everybody's got to be pulling in the right direction. And so I think that's one. And the other reason that I really love, especially football, is kind of like you said, the org chart is very clear, and you have these different rooms that, while they may be doing their own thing, you could break down, you've got a general manager in the NFL, and then you've got a head coach, but at every level, you've got head coach, and then you have offensive and defensive coordinators. And then under them, you've got, call it your middle management level, right? You've got position coaches, you've got linebackers coaches, defensive line coach, secondaries coach, you've got running backs coach. And so all these rooms, again, as you said earlier, you're as a department leader, especially in football, college, you've got guys 2, 3, 4 years, and you're always recruiting, always bringing new people in. So you're developing your current talent, you're recruiting future talent, you're developing them. You've got to have that room fit in with the overarching scheme of the offense. And then as a team, offense has to support the team goals, defense has to support the team goals. So everything rolls up into that overarching goal. But then you can't work in silos. And again, this is another thing that you see in the business world. Offense and defense aren't talking, or, product and sales and marketing aren't all on the same page. Like, could you imagine a football team where the offensive lineman doesn't know whether it's a run block or a pass block. And, if he's thinking run block and the receiver's running a route and then the quarterback doesn't know what's going on and the running back is thinking something else, like you just don't see these in sports the way you do in business. And it fascinates me that businesses have those gaps, and more so that they're unseen and therefore tolerated as long as they are.
Yeah. Like, do you find that a lot of organizations use the phrase or word family, like we're a family? And I wonder about the validity of that, because if you're a family, like I get the connotation of it, but it also sets a precedent, because now there has to be someone that's paternal or maternal. There has to be a dad or a mom or a caregiver. There has to be, and sometimes you tolerate things in your family that you wouldn't tolerate on a team. So have you run across that language of, hey, we're a family? And what do you think about that?
I do see it quite a bit. One comes to mind because it's actually successful. I've got a friend and a coaching client in Pennsylvania who, it's a family business. He's second generation running it. They're in succession planning, and it's a very successful business. And it is run and treated like a family, and everybody there at every level of the organization feels like they're a part of it. It is a very unique place. I've seen the word thrown around in other businesses, but it's not a core value. I mean, it's one of their 3 core value words, and it really does show through. I think they're one of the ones who, they don't treat those like words the way that, when we caution people, hey, culture is not the words that you put up or whatever, like they actually do run all of their decisions through those core values. I think like the sweet spot is everything you do is kind of between that, whether you want to call it a noble cause or your overarching vision and your values, right? If you're in alignment there, you're golden. And they do a great job of doing that. Now, I haven't been there day to day enough to know whether or not like the maternal, paternal figure and caretaker comes into place, but I could see how that might, like you may have an office manager that serves as a caretaker. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty interesting. It kind of reminds me, like whatever analogies you pick, whatever illustrations, you got to run with it, like go with it, but also be prepared to think about the ramifications of whatever you choose. Because if someone says, well, you're not treating me like family, like you should treat me with more love or more respect. You're like, yeah, but I keep throwing the ball to you on third down and you keep dropping the ball. I got to make a change. Like you're making me make a change. So even though you're family, I got to put in the second stringer.
Right. Yeah. And that probably wouldn't happen in the family Thanksgiving football game.
It's very true. And the other thing too, that it makes me think about is, I just wrote about this recently where I was working with the vice president of Microsoft Global Sales, and we were talking about the complexity of Microsoft Global, like how unbelievably complex it is. He said, yeah, but Gary, you got to make it really simple. Like even a company as big as Microsoft. So you have this really amazing idea, but then it's really complicated. The idea is simple, but it's really complicated to execute and organize, but you better bring it back down to simple, or else the message is not going to be communicated. And I think whether it's a business or a sports team, it's complicated. Like it just is. You could say, well, the goal is to win. Yeah, that's a simple goal, is to win. But it's complicated to get there. But the messaging has to come back to simple. And that's what I love what you're saying, talking about.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because you've got a great post on your website about simplicity. In fact, you've got a story with Nick Saban talking about it. And it was one of the things I wrote down. I wanted to make sure we talked about the power of simplicity. So again, I'm glad you brought that up. Have you found a way to help people at the top, organizational leaders or department leaders, simplify their messaging?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because I teach this method of execution for businesses. It's called 4x4s. So you make 4 goals every 4 months. And so it's like trimesters, 4 goals every 4 months. And they're like, well, shouldn't it be more complicated than that? I'm like, no, I don't care how you track it. I don't care what CRM you use or what project management tool you use. And I just think you should just put it on a wall on a white sheet. there are 4 goals, and I call them boulders. Like there's too many pebbles. Like you can't count all the pebbles, but boulders are the big things, right? So it's like, what are the 4 things you want to accomplish in the next 4 months? So it's short enough that you better get on it, but it's enough time for you to accomplish it. And so when everybody in the organization at the different levels does their 4x4s, all of a sudden you have, 25, 26, 27, 28 boulders being moved. And that's awesome. I mean, it's like a gear, like each one of those wind wheels is a gear and makes the entire organization go round. And if everybody's doing their 4x4s, it's really powerful. And it almost seems too simple, but I would rather have, I don't know about you, but I'd rather have employees doing the big stuff and making it really simple than them be caught up in all the minutia and trying to figure out what is the right thing, because we get paralyzed by the analytics. And we live in this day and age of analytics. Like everybody is trying to tap into AI to give them analytics and information. But you mentioned earlier, like there's a different way of knowing things. Like when we talk about the leadership pyramid and having experience in all those areas, you can know it intellectually, but have you ever actually led anything? It's one of my big beefs with politicians, by the way. Like we have all these politicians, not I sound like I'm a crusty 90-year-old, but we have all these politicians who are in leadership and have never led anything. They've come up with policy or they've won a popularity contest, but they actually haven't led. So we have a bunch of leaders in our country not actually knowing how to lead. And I think that's troubling at the very least, but I'm not sure we're sending our best and brightest leaders into politics. But it's like there's different levels of knowing. And it's one of the things that I think is the shortcoming of ChatGPT and the age of AI. It'll give you all the right ingredients to bake a cake, but if you don't sequence it properly, then you're not getting a cake. You can put eggs on cocoa, put it in the oven for 45 minutes, take it out, put some flour on top and some milk, and you have something that resembles a cake, but it's not actually a cake. Right. I think in mental performance, there's a sequence and leadership, there's a sequence to them. And you can sort of piecemeal it together a little bit, but you're really not going to get the intended outcome.
It's a really great observation, and I would agree with that completely. It brings up another question that I know I wanted to ask you, and that is let's say you get called into UW football team, or you get called into Microsoft, and maybe those are bad examples because you've been there before. You get called into a new place, right? And if it's an athlete, they're in the middle of the season, they're struggling. What's your go-to tactic to bust them out of their slump as soon as possible? And maybe not necessarily an athlete, but I think it's easier to say in season for an athlete. I mean, if it's business, they're always in season, so it gets a little blurred.
Yeah. It's shockingly simple. Well, there's a couple different tools that I like to use. One of them I created, I don't know, about a year ago. And I've been thinking about it for a couple of years, but it wasn't, how you try something out and then you test it, you stress test it. It's like walking on a 2x4 between 2 chairs. And you're like, I'm going to stress test this thing. I wonder how much weight my theory holds. But I've tested it. I kind of like it. So basically it's a mental health, what I call a bridge assessment. And so the first pillar is crisis. So a player might be in crisis, or, one of your clients might be in crisis. So that's a crisis pillar. Then there's a bridge that goes to the second pillar. And underneath that bridge, around that bridge, there's things that you can do to help them to go from crisis to coping, because we want them to cope with whatever issues or problems that they have. And in my view, this is where mental health really gets it wrong. It really falls short, because most of the mental health that I'm aware of stops at helping people cope. Not all of it, but the majority of it. If you go to a school, if you go to a college, you go to a business, they're all talking about how to cope with issues and problems. They're not really talking mental performance and getting stronger. They're just talking about coping. So one of the things that we say, if you want to go from coping to, or crisis to coping, is that you have to make things simple. You have to ask for help. You have to make a plan. Like you're helping them go from crisis to coping. So when they get to the coping pillar, okay, great. Now they get to go from coping to thriving. And that third pillar requires a different set of things, steps to take to get across to the thriving. But then there's a final pillar, which is transcending, where you're just like, your mind is just so different. You think differently. And it's so invigorating and so exciting. Every day you wake up excited. And so when I'm working with the player, if I'm called in, I have to sort of assess where they are on this mental health bridge assessment. Is there one area that's in crisis, or are there many areas in crisis? And how are they coping with things? Are they thriving in any of those areas? And I just do a little bit of research and homework. And I have an elite mindset mental performance assessment that I do. So they can fill something out online and they can take it. And then that gives me a really great idea where they think they're struggling. That might not be the area they're struggling in, but it's the self-perceived areas they're struggling in. So there's 22 different categories, and I can pinpoint typically pretty well which of these categories that they're really struggling with. And then you're absolutely right. It's sometimes you're working in crisis and you're working and helping somebody figure out a particular area. But then you get to a place where this person gets good at what they do, and then you're helping them to continue to stay at that high level. For example, Russell Wilson would talk to Trevor Moawad 365 days a year. It wasn't once a week. It wasn't twice a month. It was Russ wanted to stay super sharp all of the time. And so the best players, and this is what Pete Carroll told me, the best players always want a coach, right? They always want to get better. And Michael Jordan always had a coach. Tom Brady always had a coach. Peyton Manning always had a coach. And you just think, well, I don't really need a coach. I'm good. I'm like, no, you don't understand. We're not teaching you just to cope. We're actually wanting you to stay at those pillars on the right. So, and so I think helping players figure out what their primary strengths are, because oftentimes what you find is that they've abandoned what their primary strengths are. So, for example, I was working with a hockey player, a really great hockey player in Canada, and he was demoted to the fourth line. There's 4 lines in hockey. And he had started on the second line, but he just really struggled. And they got demoted to the third line, demoted to the fourth line. And so now I'm thinking, okay, the guy's in crisis. So let's help him get out of crisis and cope. And so spent a little bit of time with him, but probably in the first or second session, I just said, hey, what's your superpower, man? Like, what is, like, as you know, in sports, it's like most of these athletes are freaks of nature. Like a guy that big should not be able to run that fast. It's amazing. And yet each position holds a different, skill set and mindset and body set. Like, it's different. So in this player's unique skill set, he needed to be fast. And so I was like, are you the fastest player on the ice? Every shifts are about, 30 to 40 seconds per shift. And I said, are you the fastest guy on the ice? He goes, well, I think I am, but I don't really know. I'm like, so you're telling me that you're the fastest player on the ice, but you're not skating the fastest. He goes, well, it's more complicated than that. I'm like, no. Just hear what I'm saying. I need you to be the fastest player. I need you to use your superpower so that you can wreak havoc. And you know what? I bet you any money that your instincts are going to kick in for all the rest of the game. Don't even worry about that. You just be fast. And so he went from the fourth line to the third line, and a week later to the second line, a week later to the first line. And then he led his team in scoring in the playoffs. So there's a good example of someone who just needed to be reminded of why they were in the particular position that they were in.
Yep. That's amazing. As you're talking through that, I love that you've got a system that goes beyond coping. I've got a colleague, his name is Hassan Kamel, and he and I have put together an emotional resilience program for, initially it was for first responders, and we've expanded this now into the corporate world. But in the first responders, it's post-certified. We do it for police, fire, and we're really proud of it. But like right at the beginning, day one, hour one, we're talking about resilience and defining it. And we actually have graphs and we use, if you're familiar with the book Anti-Fragile, we use that language. And I absolutely love that book and that whole concept of anti-fragility. And we'll talk about, by definition, resilience is a return to pre-crisis levels. Well, we don't want to just get back to baseline. Like, there's nothing wrong with only returning to baseline, but we want to see baseline as the floor of what we're aiming for. And, beyond that would be like, in your words, it could be the thriving and then transcending. Our words are anti-fragility, and getting to a point where we can be a system or an organism that actually thrives from chaos or adversity, right? Just like in anti-fragility. And I'll actually put up a graph and take this into physical training world, since my background is, strength conditioning and, owning a gym. When you go into the gym and do a strength training session, you don't leave the gym stronger than when you walked in. You're actually tearing down muscles, and you're in a weakened state, a stressed state post-workout. But if training is organized properly and food and sleep and all the recovery stuff is done correctly, then you recover and then actually go into what we would call super compensation. So not only do you return to baseline, but you build back up bigger, better, stronger, faster, better able to handle that stress the next time you encounter it, right? And so this whole idea of only returning to baseline is a very limited construct. And so again, I love that you have a system that helps people visualize that and sets those goals to work towards. So, yeah.
I love that. How powerful. That's so cool. Do you mind if I steal that from you? I'll give you permission. I'll give you credit.
Just say it came from me. That's fine. That's fine. I didn't come up with anti-fragility. I give Taleb credit for that one. So,
well, but you know what is cool about that? What you're talking about, just the conviction in your voice that you've been there and done that. And, we talked about that word knowing, like, that intimately, right? You know that works. And you know that if you tear something down and build it back up stronger, you become anti-fragile. So I love that. And resilience to me is it's not necessarily an exercise. It's what you become when you put all these different, factors into play. And when you do all these things and you put all these skills into, you become resilient.
Yes, it is a quality that you can both exhibit and develop.
I love that. Yeah. Outstanding. Love it.
Yeah. So one of the other things, I had a blast digging through your website, Gary. You've got some really good stuff up there. We'll put a link to it in the show notes so people can check it out. You talk about scheduling. Actually, before we get into scheduling your feelings, I want to talk about predetermining, because I love this. I've never thought about giving it that name. I've written about choice architecture. That's in my book, and I think it's basically the same thing. But you've talked about how elite performers with elite mindsets waver less in the moment because they have pre-decided the actions, behaviors, or mindsets, putting themselves in a future optimal circumstance. Can you talk about, why that's so important, and then how listeners can start to do that?
Yeah. So there's something called the illusion of choice, and it kind of goes hand in hand with this, where if you want to be average at something, think of like, the Cheesecake Factory menu. If you want to be average at something, you have lots of choices. Like, you're not holding back from anything. There's no guardrails. When you want to be really good at something, you have less choices. And if you want to be elite at something or really good, excellent, then you kind of have no choice. There's a certain way you have to carry yourself, a certain way you have to practice, a certain way you have to eat. There's a certain way you have to sleep. You kind of have no choice if that's what you want. The fallacy that we're trying to address is that you can put in less effort and achieve what you want. So if you're going to put in less effort, but hope to be in a championship, well, you're sort of confused. Like, you have the illusion that you can still have lots of choices and yet try and win a championship. You actually can't do that. So I think that idea of pre-deciding how you're going to live your life and say, listen, if I want to be really good at bodybuilding, I have no choice. There's a certain way I got to eat. And I think that idea of removing choices from the mental equation, like if you're trying to figure out what you can do or what you can get away with, you're already asking the wrong question. So that idea of pre-deciding is, no, this is just how I live my life. This is just what I do. And I'm not having a conversation with myself. I remember getting out of my front door one day. It was like, I'm a 3:45 a.m. kind of guy, and I'm getting out my door to go to the gym. And I was just like, I don't want to do this. And I literally said out loud, nobody around, 4 a.m. I was like, I didn't ask you. And here I am, like, totally schizophrenic, right? And having a conversation with myself. And I'm like, hey, I didn't ask you. And I think sometimes we listen to ourselves too much, and we don't talk to ourselves enough. And so I was like commanding myself, no, this is just kind of what we do, you know? So yeah, that idea of like deciding as many things ahead of time as you can to make your life really simple.
I love it. I love it. I use that a lot. I teach that a lot. I've never heard someone explain it the way you did. I love hearing it in new ways. It's like hearing a great, I don't want to say a cover song, that I'm not implying that you're doing my song, but like when you hear somebody say something similar in a new way, it's
I love it too. I think we have very similar minds.
Yeah. So the other thing is scheduling your feelings. And so I think that's a fascinating, concept. So can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so it is really interesting. Like I remember getting a phone call from a head coach at 11:45 p.m. one night after a game, and coach was like, "What am I doing wrong?" You know, and I said, if you really want to know the truth, the way I see it, it's not my perspective; it's just my perception, because there's a difference between perception and perspective. So I'm just going to give you my perception of how things are. I could be wrong. But my perception is that the team is playing emotionally. They're not playing with emotion. And it kind of just stopped him in his tracks. And he was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, first of all, am I coaching emotionally or am I coaching with emotion? And that was exactly the right sequence here. Like he's showing great self-leadership, right? But that idea of like playing with emotion is having a certain level of control over your emotions. And so when you're playing or when you're involved in something, having a sequence or having some type of protocol can be really helpful in many ways in different high pressure, high stress environments. But oftentimes the goal of evaluation, because a lot of our emotions are either in the future or in the past. They're not necessarily in the present moment. So we're upset about a play that just happened, which is the past, or we're concerned about something that might happen in the future, and we get concerned about that. 1986 Boston Red Sox, Billy Buckner lets a ball go through the middle of his legs, right? 2 nights before, he talked about the worst thing in the world that could ever happen is a ball go between my legs in a critical moment, right? And so like he was already concerned about what was going to happen in the future, even though it was just maybe a little bit of a fleeting comment, but it was right off the top of his head. He was aware of it. And so to be in that present moment means that we need you to be fully engaged. So what do you do with your feelings? And in my view, I teach my athletes to schedule or postpone your feelings. And the idea behind that is that I need you present in the moment to do whatever task you're doing, because I don't want you to be self-conscious in the moment where you're trying to perform. So we want you to be task conscious, not self-conscious, because you think too much about how people are going to see you or what's going to happen if you don't do really well. But if you're task conscious, then you're like fully engaged there. And then after a game, the whole point of watching film or having a conversation with somebody, and the whole point of evaluating is so that you can learn as much as you can about your performance and your team's performance. Well, when is the worst time in the world to do that? Well, just after a game, right? Especially when you lose. So if you could learn to evaluate your performance, not the night of, but let's say on a Monday or on a Saturday or Sunday, whenever your game is, the day after, I think that's really healthy. And you know what? Make time for you to feel all the emotions that you want. So maybe it's on the way home from a game, and you're driving in the car. You want to feel all your emotions? Go ahead and feel them. Like you got 20 minutes to feel them. You want to schedule your emotions for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. because usually the edges off your feelings a little bit and you can better handle them. Maybe you just, it gives it a chance to dissipate a little bit and just deal with the fundamental feelings like I could have done much better and I feel like I didn't do as well as I can. But you kind of narrow your feelings to that, right? So you're not dealing with every feeling that you can possibly have in that moment, but you're sort of naming and identifying those feelings. And sometimes that's better done the next day. So it's just sort of scheduling or planning when you want to evaluate your performance and when you want to feel whatever it is that you need to feel. Just do that. But in the moment when you're needing to perform at a high level, that's not the time to be doing it.
And I think that's the important part here is I think a lot of would be high performers, or I don't want to say want to be in a negative way, but people who want to take that next step underestimate the importance of being present and the role that focus plays in the execution at that level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's dissipated energy is what it is. And here's how I'd like to say it, is where your focus goes, your energy flows. So if your focus is on, something that just happened in the past, or something that might happen in the future, now you're pouring energy into that thing. It's not going into that present moment. And I think it's so important. I have this fun little, I don't pull this out very often, but I have this really cool time thing. What do you call this? An hourglass. And you have sand on the top. That represents the future. And the bottom represents the past, as you can see. And right in the very center is where the present moment is. And so to figure out how to live in that moment, I think is so important, because you can't do anything about the past. You can't do anything about the future. You can only be in the present and put yourself in the best position to succeed. And one of my favorite sayings in the world for any athlete or almost anybody in any different craft, it's, you cannot control an outcome, but you can always put yourself in the best position to succeed. So don't worry about the stuff that you can't control. You can throw the best pitch in the world and it can hit for a dinger. I just saw the other day someone hit a home run. I think it was Cal Raleigh from the Mariners. It's his 41st home run. It was way low on outside. There's no way he should have hit that for a home run. And the guy hit it for a home run. What are you going to do? And so I think if you just concern yourself with, okay, what can I do to put myself in the best position to succeed in this relationship, or this day, or this game, or this business? Worry about that. Because if you're not in the right position in sports, you're not going to make the play. It's already over, right? Now you're vulnerable as a team because you weren't in the right position. Well, it's the same way with all these other things in business and in life. If you're not in the right position, you can't make a play. And your job is to make a play. So, above all the other things, always put yourself in the best position to succeed. And if that means getting 7 hours sleep, make sure you get your 7 hours sleep. Don't set your alarm for 5 a.m. Set your alarm for 9 p.m. because that's when you go to bed, right? So figure out how to be at your best all the time. And a part of that is always putting yourself in the best position to succeed.
And I feel like we are so aligned on so many different things. As you're talking through that, one of my lines that I've always used is focus on actions, not outcomes, for the same reason. I mean, you can't control the outcomes, but you can control your actions. And, that one for me I've always loved Nick Saban. And I always feel like I have to apologize for that as a Clemson guy. It feels blasphemous. I will always root for Clemson, but I love studying.
Hey, know your enemy, right? Know your enemy.
Exactly. The dude, I will not argue. The dude is amazing. And I've learned so much from him, and that process focus orientation, right? It's just, you focus on blocking and tackling. You do take care of the actions, right? If you want to, I always use the analogy of somebody wants to lose 10 pounds in 30 days. And it's well, but how are you going to do that, right? You need to focus on, like you said, it's to sleep 8 hours a night. It's eat according to your meal plan, 90% of the time. Get the 4 workouts in, get the 10,000 steps a day, drink the water. Those are binary boxes that you can check at the end of the day. Did I do what I'm supposed to do? And as long as you do those, maybe you only lose 9 pounds in 30 days, but you've built sustainable habits. And now like you were saying earlier with resilience, it's who you're becoming and the habits that you're building. So we're very much aligned there. I've also noticed in our conversation, Gary, you are very particular with your words. And I absolutely love that. I'm a huge stickler for language. And I know that you understand the importance of that and how it impacts neural pathways, how it plays into not only our self-talk, but communication with others. Can you talk about maybe why you feel like that's so important, and how you teach people to bring a certain vigilance to their language, both spoken and inner?
Yeah, the neurolinguistics are actually really crucial. And as you well know, there's something called neurolinguistic programming, NLP, and I've paid a lot of attention to that because words are cues to how people feel. They're hints. So when it's like a hint into their worldview and how they see the world. And so to listen to people talk really gives you a pretty good indication of what's going on beneath the surface in their life. So I think the neurolinguistic programming and the language is important, but there's a pretty simple way to think about this. Andy McKay from the Seattle Mariners taught at Sacramento College, and he was teaching sports psych there. And then he went to the Mariners, and then he worked with the Colorado Rockies for years. And the guy is brilliant. Andy McKay is brilliant. And one of the things that him and I talked about, and he told me was that, Gary, you got to learn to talk in 15-second funnels. And I was like, wait, what? Like, aren't I supposed to let everyone know, the depth of knowledge that I have about a subject? And he goes, listen, I can appreciate the fact that you know that and you should. But he said, but if you don't learn to speak in 15-second funnels to a player who's on the field or about to go on the field, or even if we're just talking like this, you can't describe a concept really quickly. It's like over their head and you're done. And I thought, oh man, I got to learn to talk about all these subjects in 15 seconds. And he said, yeah, and I would recommend that you put every one of your subjects in a picture instead of just words. So now I try and come up with that leadership pyramid, or I'll come up with some other visual of something like the bridge assessment. You'll just see these images that I have, and people remember images. It's amazing where I could have a client, I could call one of my clients right now that I worked with, let's say 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And if I say, what's the leadership pyramid? They'll tell me. They know exactly what they are. I'll talk to them about the mental bridge assessment. They'll give me the 4 pillars. I just find that people remember images. And I think that's really important in this day and age of quick fixes and quick dopamine hits and people scrolling through Instagram and whatever. But I love that idea of just using word pictures and finding the language to describe things like thoughts are like calories. If you have too many thoughts that you can't expend, what happens to you? You get slow and lethargic. You get fat, right? And so it's like, oh, wait a minute, I got to control the amount of thoughts, even good ones. You can eat 100 apples in a day and still feel sick. It's not good for you. So just coming up with concepts like that and just using illustrations for whatever reasons just seems to work.
Yeah, I love that. I've always heard and known that humans are very good at, or prefer learning through stories, right? I mean, if you think about, how language began and oral history, storytelling, whatever. But, people remember things in story form a lot more easily. The picture thing is new to me. It makes total sense though. I mean, I totally get that. I learned very early on, a guy named Dave Tate is one of the best strength coaches. I guess if powerlifting has a Hall of Fame, he's in it. But he always says, if you don't know your subject well enough to explain it on the back of a napkin to a waiter or a waitress, you don't know it well enough. And I love that. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the difference between kind of knowing something and then knowing how to communicate it or teach it. And, I just made a note for myself to start to try to come up with images for some of my concepts. So I like it.
Yeah. The 15-second funnel thing, you really start to comprehend it or know it when you're out on the field with an athlete, because all you got is 15 seconds, if that. And so it's like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm not going to describe something on a chalkboard, or I'm not going to tell them all that I know about this subject. No, this is pretty much it. How do you do mental imagery? You do it like this, So, and you can nuance it, but I'm kind of a stickler for coming up with the essence of something. And then if I want to bridge out from that with an athlete or with a business professional, I can, but I want to get the fundamental thing. Like, for example, there's, people talk about, fear of fill in the blank. You have a fear of something. Listen, there's only one way to overcome a fear. It's like all the therapy, all the counseling, all the psychotherapy, it comes back down to the same thing. And that is exposure therapy. You got to expose yourself to the thing you fear. That's it. So you can nuance it a million ways from there, but in the end, it all comes back down to that.
Yep. I love that. Hey, Gary, I want to wrap up. We've got a couple of questions for you. So the first one is sort of your timeless truths. So you've been doing this for several decades, 3 decades. If you had to write a blog post, I know I'm putting you on the spot for one that's going to require a lot of thinking, but if you had to write a blog post, and the blog post could be 20 truths or 30 truths from 30 years, but just give me maybe 2 to 3 timeless truths that maybe have always been and will always be applicable to elite mindset and peak performance.
Yeah, I think number one for me would be positivity doesn't work. I would say that it can be helpful for a moment in time, but positivity as a whole is more of a kind of a pop culture kind of thing than it is actually true. And I know that there's entire schools and universities and classes talk about the power of positivity. I just don't find in my 30 years of leadership and working with athletes and high level leaders, I can see the value of it, that it has momentary value, but as a construct or a way to look at life, it falls short. So, mostly because, and I'm going to oversimplify it, but in general, positivity is a feeling. It's a feeling. And then once you have that feeling, it can affect your physiology, right? Your hormones. So it can have that kind of an effect, or even smiling at somebody. Like, we're chemists. Like, we literally can change someone else's chemistry by our smile on our face or the look on our face. So there is value in positivity. I just don't think it's a long-term fuel. And what I think is better than positivity is optimism. And here's the reason why. Because optimism always requires a reason for you to be optimistic. So go be optimistic. Go give yourself the reason why you can be optimistic about something. So if you say, hey, I can go drive a Formula One race car, and I'll say, Ryan, have you ever done that before? You're going to be like, well, no, but I'm super positive I can. I'm like, well, that's really great. But maybe you should take a lesson or two. But if you take that lesson or two, and then you say, and if I say to you, hey, Ryan, what reasons have you given yourself to be optimistic that you can do this? You have factual reasons to prove to yourself and somebody else that you can do this. So optimism is better than positivity. So that would be number one. So have an optimistic outlook and always give yourself reasons to be optimistic. And number two, I would say that there's only 2 real true ways to build confidence. There's lots of faux reasons, and again, pop culture reasons to build confidence. But really, there's only 2 at the highest levels of performance. Number one is preparation. So if you're prepared for something, you're going to be more confident. So preparation is crucial. And number 2, prove it, and mostly to yourself. The 2 P's: preparation and prove it. And when you prove it to yourself over and over and over again, yeah, you probably have a reason to be optimistic that you can do something. So those are probably my 2 big ones.
I love it. Gary, before I ask you the final question, where can folks get more of you and your work?
Oh, I appreciate the question. Elite Mindset Nation is my website, and it's because I want to create a nation of high performers. So Elite Mindset is my company, but my website's elitemindsetnation.com. And then on Instagram, that's where most of my clients are, as you could well imagine. And it's at Elite Mindset. I'm the guy with the blue verified dot.
Awesome. We'll put links to those in the show notes to make it easy on people. Final question, your number one tip for people to get better at moving the chains or building consistency?
Yeah, to me, it always starts with win the day. So I call it WTD. And so here's how I teach it. Everybody's got their own method, but how I teach it is, first of all, print off a calendar of the present month and put it in your closet. You stick it on the wall. And every day, you're going to put a W or an L. There's nothing in between. There's no ties, a W or an L. And what you want to do is you want to put either 5 or 7. Don't pick another number. Only 5 or 7 things that you do every day that put you in the best position to succeed. We talk about being in position, right? So what can you do every day that puts you in the best position to succeed? And if, let's say you pick 5 things, if you do 3 out of the 5, you get a W for that day. If you didn't do 3 out of the 5, you get an L. But pay attention, even on weekends, pay attention to how you're generally feeling about your life. And if you keep giving yourself a reason to be optimistic, and you keep putting W's, hey, listen, 2 W's, that's pretty good. 3 W's, hey, that's a winning streak. You get 4 and 5 W's in a week, now you have a winning streak and you have momentum. And when you live your life with momentum, listen, nothing feels as good as progress. So just keep making progress. So yeah, go win the day and take control of, those are all things you can control. Go take control of it. Have an internal locus of control rather than an external one, which is, I'm going to judge the success of my day by the things that happen to me. Listen, that's super unstable, but we want you to practice your self-efficacy and your self-leadership. So go do those things. And then when the tough stuff hits, you're in a far better position to handle them because you've already won the day.
Yeah, that's so well said. Gary, thank you so much for being an amazing guest. For everybody listening, thank you for being here. I'm glad you're here, excited for the conversations and guests that we're going to bring you in the future. Hopefully a lot more just like Gary. And every week we're going to bring you tips and tools on how you can use Move the Chains in your day-to-day life with real-world examples from my life, coaching clients, friends, other high-performing, successful folks, so that you can see how they have their own version of Move the Chains or Win the Day to fuel their successes. So thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the Move the Chains podcast wherever you listen so you get notified of new episodes. And if you dig what you're hearing, please leave a review and maybe share this with somebody that you know would benefit from listening.